There we go. Okay, glad the technology is working. Right, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for this final wrap-up seminar of our series. I hope that you will find it fascinating to look back on our journey. I'm not going to chat too much now because there's quite a lot obviously to get through. So I'm going to run through the seminar and then yeah, give some time to chat in a bit. Okay, so if you recall, our seminar emerged from a question posed by Gary: how do philosophers best respond to a pandemic caused by an unseen virus? And Gary's answer was tied to the philosophy's role to foster critical thinking, to create robust minds that can deal with the viral spread of information, disinformation, misinformation. Other answers emphasize diversity thinking, listening to all kinds of perspectives, and some spoke to imaginative thinking about the new world that might come out of this. So we weren't certain what would work, if anything, but the main aim of the seminar was to create an open space for ISCIA community, not only to share thoughts and ideas and concerns and stories guided by these three answers, but also to keep connected and maintain a level of community in the university. So what I want to do here, sorry, I'm a bit behind myself with the slides. What I want to do here is kind of offer an overview of how the seminar flowed. Looking back at the beginning kind of gives us a really fascinating snapshot of our early concerns, the shifts in our concerns also as time passed. That should take roughly about 30 minutes, maybe 35. And then I'd like to open up the space for reflections and comments, perhaps on what the value of the seminar was, what could be different, maybe what's next. Okay, but before I do that, obviously, I want to thank the speakers and the participants who shared this extraordinarily rich and diverse context of concerns and engagements. It's far too detailed, obviously, for me to capture here in this overview, but because it felt to me as if each seminar generated a kind of potential conversations that could really just continue for much longer. So I'm just going to point out some of the key insights for me from each seminar. And then if you'd like to return to some of the seminars in more detail, you can access them on our website. And I have to apologize in advance for some of the clunky technology in some of them. For our first seminar, based on Pedro's newspaper article, we invited participants to share thoughts on what lockdown meant for them personally. And what struck me most from Pedro's presentation was his caution about racialized and decontextualized media reporting, which feeds a kind of a stereotype of township communities that are uninformed, don't care about their safety, easily resort to violence, and desperately need the aid of lockdown institutions and citizens. So without denying the serious hardships, we need to be wary of this insulting kind of paternalism. I mean, Pedro argued that township communities have already developed resilience, that COVID-19 is not the first crisis faced, and with limited resources, many manage through innovation and through local grassroots informal economies. So imagining an alternative ethos here, Pedro argued that there are models here for social cohesion and for a sustainable economic replacement to this neoliberal system that just creates extreme wealth disparities and lurches from crisis to crisis. So on a practical note here, this was also a time of major learning curves for many academics concerning online education. And this shift to an online environment may be one of the major, more permanent changes precipitated by this pandemic. In any event, for us, technical issues saw an abrupt end to our first seminar. But we picked up the thread in the second and continued reflecting on the meaning of lockdown. I mean, it came clear that COVID-19 was a source of multiple concerns and diverse perspectives. So prominent were concerns about repressive authority, police brutality, the ghost of the apartheid state, feelings of disconnection, impotence in the face of the economic crisis. Also a big call for rethinking how things work. There was a strong psychological concerns over the uncertainty of being stuck in no man's land, in limbo, unable to plan, strong sense of discrepancy between quality time that you're suddenly able to enjoy while others were suffering badly. Also downtime, time for creativity, but put against this pressure to be productive. Strong concerns about information, over-information, quality of the data that's key to the government's response. Lots of existential concerns about freedom of movement, loss of agency, working online, managing expectations, and mindfulness. Okay, so what first emerged from all of this was the insight that the way we respond to these complexities is tied to how we frame the virus. And the philosophical question, of course, arose right in the beginning. How do we know that our framing or our idea of the virus is accurate or consistent with its reality? So that formed the theme for Seminar 3. And the underlying question here is, well, do you support or protest against the lockdown? How do you justify it? What information are you using? So as framed by Gary, we form an idea of what COVID-19 is through the information we have access to. But the pandemic is a highly complex context of viral misinformation, which is inaccurate, and disinformation, which is manipulative and selective. So my takeaway from Gary is that science is the obvious source of trustworthy information about COVID-19. But because of the necessary limitations of how science works, it cannot immediately give us accurate information. Problem is, governments have to act immediately. So while the information science offers is not complete or perfect, it's not meaningless. It's the most useful resource we have, and government action based on it, even if it's imperfect, is not arbitrary. Okay, but as framed by David, the COVID-19 pandemic is a pseudo-reality, almost exclusively made by people's overreactions to the virus. He believes that scientists can be bought by prevailing authorities, and he cited an unbought scientist who could insisted that reported case fatalities were dangerous, caused panic, and they're meaningless. David expressed a kind of a deep concern that acting on meaningless numbers as if they self-evidently mean something, the World Health Organization had unjustifiably declared a global pandemic, and the South African government used this to falsely justify the kind of crippling effects of its lockdown response. But David was certain that losses of freedom, unemployment, poverty, stress, debt, and so on will have generational consequences that will outweigh any threat posed by COVID-19. Okay, so David is a friend, but I'm more sympathetic to Gary's arguments in support of the government decision to lock down. I still am more sympathetic to that. There are basic errors of reasoning in the details of David's claims, but they nevertheless, they raised really, really important concerns. First, about to the extent to which I or anyone can justify my own position and reasoning. And second, about how to frame and negotiate the reach of state authority. So Seminar 4 addressed the first concern. Why do we become captured by a particular way of framing something like a pandemic? Why do views become polarized? Why do discussions often just strengthen entrenched positions? And why do we get upset and vehement and defensive? As it turns out, the way that we think about these issues closest to our hearts is extremely complex. But my basic takeaway from Anton's presentation was, first, if we are serious about thinking together through the pandemic, we really do have to understand how motivated reasoning works. And we have to at least try to avoid it. So I found his tips for this very insightful. Quickly, be humble. Nobody's immune to motivated reasoning. recognize that all news sources, all information is biased, and this doesn't render the information meaningless. You just have to be aware of this. Treat all single sources of information with extreme caution. Science is collaborative. It does have self-correcting mechanisms, peer review, replication, falsifiability, meta-analysis, eventual scientific consensus, but this takes time, which we don't have. Remain curious. I thought that was interesting. Be willing to be surprised rather than just determined to be right. Watch for over-elaborate gymnastics to try to make your arguments work, and be wary of any kind of hubris, arrogance, or self-confidence, and watch for emotive responses. That feeling in you that says, yes, that's it. Beware, especially if it's immediate. Be wary of what feels right immediately. And then be wary if you find it nauseating or painful to listen to an opposite view. Okay, so those are quite useful, I thought. Then in our first collaboration with CANRAD, we turned to the second concern about the reach of state authority, asking whether we can compare lockdown to the apartheid state of emergency. So while there are similarities, curfew, army patrols, banning of gatherings, funerals, roadblocks, cordoning off areas, restrictions on movement, Janet and Jenny strongly differentiated these situations using the keys of agency, legitimacy, authority, and fear. So in a legitimate state, people have the freedom to speak out without fear if they experience regulations as unjust, and they are free to intervene if members of the police services, for example, act badly. President can admit mistakes, which he did, and he can try to rectify them. And mostly the population accepted government authority to apply lockdown regulations willingly as a kind of necessary sacrifice on, on the behalf of the broader community. So under the apartheid state of emergency, by contrast, by strong contrast, most of the population was subject to repression in some way or another. There were banning orders, house arrest, indefinite detention without trial, torture by apartheid security police, no freedom of association, arbitrary arrest, censorship, no right to speak out and protest. So Janet and Jenny concluded that the restrictions on our rights now or during lockdown, but generally speaking, were not abuses or violations. They're not indications of this insidious authoritarian creep. But they did say that there are worrying exceptions to this. It's important to understand that it's important to get a grip of these use of force by police and sources of an unacceptably kind of high number of police brutality. So in our second collaboration with CANRAD, we looked at police brutality. I mean, the UN cited South Africa for excessive use of force in lockdown, and there were reports of police using rubber bullets, tear gas, water bombs, and whips to enforce social distancing, and complaints of murder, unwarranted use of firearms, and corruption. David Bruce argued that the problems of excessive force, though, reflect not scandalous police militarization. I mean, this is a simplistic view, very suited to media sensationalism, and the reasons for police brutality, he argued, are far more complex, including a challenging policing environment, obviously continuities from the apartheid state, high crime, and an extremely non-compliant population, which is an excellent thing for democracy, but maybe not such a great thing for policing. Dysfunction from excessive size and complexity of the police service, which keeps kind of increasing through these ad hoc creation of units. 123,000 new recruits, but no careful, thorough, or selective recruitment process. Problems of bureaucratic inertia, opaque, incoherent leadership, no kind of shaping of the policing in South Africa as a service rather than a force, and dysfunctional accountability for excessive use of force. So the important takeaway from this holistic understanding is that the pandemic can show up deeper, wider problem areas in our social systems. Seminar 7 showed a real gear shift into listening mode. For many of us, the virus was still an abstract concept, kind of happening at a distance. Our concerns were intellectual. But Amy's first-hand story gave us a kind of a vicarious glimpse of what happens when the plague gets up close and personal. Having contracted COVID-19 after kind of a happy spring weekend with friends, Amy spoke of this initial denial, like bad things don't happen to me. The eerie kind of normalcy in life in Geneva, and her hope to just continue business as usual. But she experienced a kind of textbook progression of fairly serious symptoms. And to protect the people she lived with, she spent 23 days in complete confinement to one room. For her, she said, it was an exercise in surrender and an encounter with fear and futility and powerlessness, especially because she at the time was facing that media coverage of Italy, people on ventilators, sort of plastic around their heads, all this overcrowding, dying in the corridors, these stunned doctors. She spoke of her loneliness, missing the physicality of human existence and the amplification of emotions, and also her strong grief, as she kind of felt bereft of the basics that make you feel human, almost bereft, because it really wasn't a solo journey. She found a kind of a hallmark of humanity in these small daily gestures of the two very high-risk people that she lived with, who had nevertheless worked absolutely tirelessly to deliver trays of this beautifully arranged food to the door, all the while having to keep themselves and the environment sanitized and safe. Okay, so in 21, maybe that felt too much. We kind of returned a little bit to intellectual concerns. And a kind of crucial aspect of handling a pandemic is not just getting accurate information, but getting its transfer right. So an umbrella organization like the World Health Organization must kind of disseminate information and broad practice guidelines through all these intermediaries, media, national governments, for example, all the way down to hyper-local community contests, which might just sort of include me and my partner, say, where action happens. And of course, we're not passive recipients of information. There's a pushback upwards in refusal to vaccinate, for example, refusal to wear masks. So it's important again to see how it all travels upwards again to evoke a response in the policymakers and the umbrella organizations. So my key takeaway from this seminar was that this whole process is extremely difficult because humans are bound by value-laden perspectives, motivated reasoning, vested interests, ideological commitments. And the question is raised about how to counter disinformation or this deliberate manipulation of information. There are absolutely no easy answers for that. Turning to the Spanish flu pandemic, our third collaboration with CANRAD, I was fascinated how the path of infection in South Africa could be traced through our extensive railway network, via which we transported soldiers home from the war. This is what made it so lethal in our country. So for me, the takeaway from the worst pandemic in modern history, it killed between, they're not sure, but between 50 or 100 million people in just 1 year. So the takeaway was its magnitude, its speed of infection, and the realization that it extended over 3 waves. The first wave was very infectious, but not deadly. The second wave was very infectious, but also lethal. It mutated to a form that killed people very quickly. Now that we're all facing second waves of COVID, this is a strong kind of wake-up call. So in Black October, it was a month in which 300,000 members of the South African population died, and they were young adults in the 20 to 40 age range. Then there was a third wave, which was less disastrous than the second. There was a certain herd immunity that had developed. So for me at that stage, the idea of the longevity of COVID-19 virus was beginning to take hold. And I was starting to think more in terms of learning to live with its continuation for a good while yet. So Brad offered us another first-hand account of getting the virus. He'd had a heads up from friends in China and New York. And unlike many Americans, he wore a mask and he shopped for food only once a week. And despite and almost, he says, unhealthy anxiety and preoccupation about avoiding exposure, he still contracted the virus. Luckily for him, it was a mild case. He had symptoms for about 4 days and they cleared up in about a week. But interestingly, what made an impact for him was not at all the disease itself, but the contingency of its timing. His confinement was aligned with the civil unrest that gripped the US under the banner of Black Lives Matter, as well as a contentious election in his home state. So for Brad, the frustration as a social justice activist of having to sit out of what he thought of as a major moment in US history brought into sharp focus America's inherently unjust systems, and these exacerbate the deadly and economically crushing impact of this disease. So that's where his mind went as a consequence of this disease. In the second part of our seminar, in the context of the passing of our Dean of Health Sciences from COVID-19, our focus shifted decisively to the practical question of learning how to live along with this virus. In seminar 11, Jayashree acknowledges that she gained strength from a long lineage of strong, determined women. And it is they who have given her the Shakti that she talks about tapping into. What we got from her was that Shakti is this powerful energy, often personified as a goddess. So when you wonder how you're going to manage, then Shakti is this coping energy that you dig into, even when you don't know what it means or even if you have it. The energy is particularly necessary, obviously, in a pandemic situation of widespread collective trauma, information overload, and the need to appear strong when you're actually feeling vulnerable and anxious. So the question would be, how do you tap into it? And of course, what we got from Jayashree is there's absolutely no easy fix, no wonder pill, no Shakti pill. Although your Shakti is there are careful ways that you need to nurture it. And Jayashree outlined in her presentation a comprehensive biopsychosocial approach, which combines physical care, strategies as simple, for instance, as mindful breathing, and psychological care and developing social support networks. So interestingly, Mimi's engagement activity with refugee women in Port Elizabeth seemed to me to be also a manifestation of this Shakti in response to the context of COVID-19. She couldn't continue with the field work with the refugee communities that she'd become involved with before the pandemic forced her to return to Europe. So to manage this kind of forced distancing, she first started a WhatsApp group to main contact, and then she developed a project called Food for Change in combination with a community of women refugees in PE. And they exchanged cooking recipes through WhatsApp and through audio and text and photo and video. They kind of reflected their daily experiences of COVID-19, making it possible to document challenges, strategies, and also resilience. So my really important takeaway from this was that we really need to dispel the idea that refugees are a threat in times of crisis or merely victims. So at a more personal level, many of us identified with the difficulties of engaging with narcissistic personalities, as a leader described them. I mean, although narcissists can be charming and make us feel wonderful, they can also be intensely challenging to live with, especially during anxious times. They have specific vulnerabilities and characteristics that can invoke outrage and despair in people close to them. So if you have to live together and create cohesion in challenging situations of close confinement, like the COVID-19 lockdown, it's especially important to recognize what a narcissistic personality is and identify the psychological mechanisms that they use in relation to those close to them. So my key takeaway from this seminar was that these mechanisms stem from deep-seated feelings of unworthiness and instability. And understanding this gives you a degree of empathy, and a more compassionate understanding helps you find ways of coping better with the negatives in this personality without losing the positives. So the next seminar involved a conversation between 3 artists concerning their personal experiences of challenges and solutions to creative work during the COVID-19 lockdown. The 3 artists also discussed multiple factors that affect expression, access, and propagation within the creative arts industry during this time. So what struck me strongly here was a challenge to the stereotypical notion of the artist as this creative genius alone in a studio who should be really flourishing productively under lockdown conditions. I mean, this stereotype was contrasted by all of these artists with the artist as a social being. And then the sense of injustice regarding the real challenges faced by artists of all kinds during the COVID-19 restrictions actually caught my interest, because underlying it is the notion put forward of art as a kind of work. When we talk about artwork, possibly the essential kind of work that should be supported by taxpayers. And this brought to mind Heidegger's controversial notion that art as work works to create and sustain an ethos for a community. So this to me opened up all sorts of questions about what art does and what art is supposed to do. Interestingly, Glenn's presentation on loss and loneliness spoke quite eloquently to this question of art as work, because his portrayal of the hermit figure was also bound up with his narrative of his own vocation as a musician. So what struck me here was the notion of artistic talent as a kind of received gift that bore with it the responsibility of becoming in turn a gift giver. So this responsibility to give music is a thread that persists even as his narrative progresses from a community-oriented youth to an adult life in which he identifies quite strongly with the hermit figure. Okay, but dare I say, the saving grace that draws the hermit back from the abyss of loss and loneliness is precisely this responsibility to give. I mean, in Glenn's case, even as a hermit figure, he delights in his responsibility to give as a teacher of music. So the double trauma of COVID-19 is then that the loss and the loneliness it evinces is compounded by the restriction and loss of that hermit's saving grace. And the message for me there is this imperative: the gifted must find ways to give the gift. Tying back to the narcissism seminar, fostering a kind of compassionate attitude seems crucial in facing the distress wrought by this pandemic. Particularly, many of us are forced into closer daily contact than ever before, so compassion becomes really, really important. So to give us a taste of a kind of mindfulness-based compassion, Belinda offered to guide us through a short practical exercise. And what struck me here was the important point that mindfulness is about attention to your mental and physical being. And this attention opens you up to a kind of careful, compassionate, non-judgmental self-observation. But being non-judgmental and compassionate shouldn't be mistaken for being self-indulgent, self-pampering. You know, Belinda noted you don't have to like everything that you notice about yourself. So for me, the practice was about self-respect, about giving your own being the right to become upper mind, and then the transfer of this kind of respectful attention to others seems to me a vital component of relationship building and social cohesion. So in the next seminar, Margaret spoke of the key anxiety provoked by COVID-19. It's always there as a permanent influence on our decisions about how to act. And it's the question, how likely is it that I will die from this disease? So in trying to answer this question, she demonstrates the difficulty, even many months after the start of the pandemic, regarding just how to interpret all of these complex COVID-19 statistics that are made widely available and updated regularly. There are, for example, many different ways of measuring fatality rates of the disease, each with its own limitations, and many contextual variables that make it impossible to give any straightforward answer to this question. But what struck me from her presentation was not only the difficulty of establishing whether I might die from this disease, but the strong likelihood of there being more nasty pandemics in my lifetime, given the steadily rising prevalence of infectious outbreaks, increasing disease richness or mutations, and wider range of pathogens. And these are the consequences of human lifestyles and our encroachment on the habitats of the world's other creatures. That was my big takeaway from that presentation. And then it seemed apposite to end our seminar series with a reflection on grief. Belinda offered us a kind of a nuanced, complex look at what it means to grieve the losses that are a consequence of the pandemic. I was taken with the metaphor of the ocean to describe the grief experience, from being hit unexpectedly by this tsunami wave and then through all the watery stages to the point finally where the waves become ripples without ever smoothing down completely, always leaving open the possibility of another monster wave. So it was important to realize that grief is not something from which you must heal. You don't get over it, she says. I thought that was really important. You learn to live with it. But also that not all losses are created equal. And in terms of the pandemic, part of the value of Belinda's presentation is a call for us to understand the complexity of types of grieving so that we can actually grieve appropriately. So to end, we may imagine and look forward to some needed social, economic, and ecological changes. We can celebrate them if they happen, if they're good. But alongside this, there's a significant sense of loss, of multiple losses. And I think those do deserve our grieving attention. Okay, thank you. That's it. Let me... Okay, technology, trying to stop sharing so that I would very much like to open up the space for comments about this, about our pandemic seminar, about where we can go, about what worked, what didn't, and where we can go further. Hoshila, I do see you're up. And would you like to start?
Thanks, Andrea. I think I mentioned it to you earlier in the week. In one of the very early ones, I think when we started in April, you mentioned in your introduction that, you know, we could still be doing this in October, virtually, working virtually and that kind of thing. And here we are, right at the end of the last working day of October, still very much in a virtual environment. And the other thing that I've picked up as you went through all of them is that in the second half of the series, we sort of started from, you know, outward things, and in the second half of the seminar series, we went more inwardly in terms of the topics that our presenters spoke about. So yeah, I think that was quite fascinating if we think about it like that.
Yeah, I found it, I mean, I went back to each of the presentations and they are enormously rich. So, I mean, I could just highlight tiny little bits of parts that struck me. But for me, it was a fascinating journey to go back and kind of look at what we were thinking at the beginning, and then how we imagined in a way that this thing would happen and then it would be over. We were kind of thinking, okay, we're going to get our peak. When is it? July, August, and then, okay, that's it. I think that now we're facing the second wave. Certainly where I'm sitting here in Belgium, the second wave is at its peak at the moment, or starting to reach its peak. Hospitals in one of the most state-of-the-art hospital systems are being overwhelmed, and it's not just the bed space, it's that absolute fatigue amongst health professionals. So yeah, I think that it's even more important. That second half of our series, I felt, is even more important because we are going to have to learn to live with this long term. Belgium is just facing second lockdown now at long last. South Africa ought to be locking down now. in my opinion. Anyway, okay, are there other comments? Maybe if you'd like to comment, just pop your video on, and then we'll, say hi, let you talk. Am I waiting for technology to kick in? Otherwise, maybe put something on chat if you feel like doing that. Otherwise, I'm going to call on the chatty ones. Okay, Gary. I was about to call on either Gary or Glenn. I'm going to call on you next, Glenn. I very much would like to hear your voices. Okay, Gary, you are muted though.
Yeah, no, sorry, unprompted, yes. No, I was just fascinated by this, by how the idea of the pandemic and the reality of the pandemic wasn't necessarily the same at times, and how often we were responding to the idea and not the reality, and like you saying now, we should lock down in South Africa. The reality is that we probably should be considering that. But the idea of doing that is so abominable to the majority of us that we are ignoring the reality, So yeah, so I've been fascinated in terms of those two sort of things shifting, and how we've seen it develop over the course of the last 6-8 months.
Yes, no, I completely agree with you that I mean, the idea reality distinction is almost a false distinction in a way. Our kind of, as you say, our reality is based on a certain perspective. That's all we've got, and the actual disease is a shifting target. We don't know. That I think is one of the things that's so difficult for a whole lot of people to live with, is this knowledge that we simply don't know this creature. We don't really know what it will do. We can't predict. But there are certain kind of rough guidelines, and we can learn from the errors of other. I'm punting this again because had Belgium locked down 3 weeks ago when they should have, they would not be in the situation now where hospitals are being overwhelmed. That, I mean, those things you can simulate through very complex modeling, and they did do a modeling exercise where it was, if we had done lockdown regulations now, what would the consequences have been if we do this, if we do that, whatever it is. And quite honestly, the lockdown did not happen when it was supposed to. Now there's a kind of more lethal second wave, not more lethal, a bigger second wave. There are also mutations, I have to say, in this virus. We've just heard this. It's not a more lethal mutation, not like Spanish flu, remember, where the second mutation was deadly. This one is not more lethal, but it's more infectious. More infections, i.e. So in the end, more lethal. We have to learn to look at this thing long term And okay, so I would definitely punt locking South Africa down right now. I'd like to come home to not to another peak. Otherwise, I'm moving from peak to peak to peak around the blooming world. I'm following the virus peaking. I'm locked down forever. So yeah, all right. Thanks, Gary. Okay, Glenn, where have you gone? Let's hear from you.
Can you hear me, Andrea?
Yes, love to see you.
I've got a very bad, unstable connection, so that's one of the reasons why I'm unfortunately struggling here on my side. But I wanted to say thank you so much for allowing the seminar series to shift in the second part towards the more personal also, because I found that I was able to cope with my own crisis because of what happened in the first part of the seminar series, which was framing how this was affecting certain people individually abroad. I remember in Switzerland and the US, and then also the idea of speaking about the Spanish flu and how that spread, and seeing people being infected who ordinarily wouldn't have been, like younger folks, as you mentioned, in the 20 to 40 age range.
Yes, yes.
And so that also just prepared me for the fact that this thing is unpredictable. Do you see that?
Yes.
And that is what allowed me then to also make sense out of this crisis. I remember meeting Christy once when I had just had my sister go onto the ventilator, and I said to her, thank God for Andrea's seminar series, because I'm not as caught off guard as I would have been, because I've heard from other people who've survived this and have come through it. So I think it was a tremendously useful and valuable seminar series that we had. And I like the balance of the scientific and the intellectual and the personal. Thanks, Andrea.
Okay, thanks, Glenn. I actually very much enjoyed the mix. I enjoyed that kind of shifting gear and the diversity of perspectives. And I'm completely with you that keeping contact, keeping kind of the thinking of the virus in mind does help you prepare somewhat. It does kind of help you not get caught off guard in a way. I found Amy's presentation very powerful, and I agree with you also that then shifting towards understand, or from just trying to understand this thing intellectually and then bashing your head, and it's like mind-blowing, to then looking more carefully at things that you can do to keep yourself sane during confinement, because it's not, I mean, okay, I'm sounding a slight panic again, but Belgium, 2 months ago, summer holiday, everyone wants out, everyone wants a normal life back, nobody is self-distancing, etc., social distancing, physical distancing, and the consequence is another lockdown now. So I think that one does need to be not to be caught off guard. So yeah, thank you. Yeah, and thanks for your contribution. I found that also very moving and yeah, a gift.
Thank you.
Okay. Who am I going to call on now? Dave, I see you there. I see at least a face, a photo. Okay, Dave doesn't actually want to chat. All right, that's fine. How about then Jayashri? I see you there next to Dave. Love to hear from you again.
Hi, Andrea. Sorry, I can't put my video on at the moment, but I just wanted to say a very big thank you for allowing me to present in this wonderful seminar, and the roundup that you gave now, just the reflections on the whole seminar, was really informative and gave a lovely perspective, lots of food for thought there. And yeah, I just want to thank you for making me part of this whole seminar. It was a great privilege.
Oh, no. The thanks and the privilege go the other way. It was just wonderful that so many people were keen to talk about so many different things. No, that, I mean, I feel very grateful to all of you for kind of being here, and also to some of the faces that are here, or you see regularly. That was wonderful. Two of the kind of very regular are the Rudmans, and I want to hear from both of you too. I know you're going, oh no, oh no, oh no, but I would really love to hear from Sharon and from Luke.
Hi everyone.
Hey,
Hi.
Sharon.
Yeah, Luke and I are actually in different venues today because because he's been going back to varsity and I've been trying to isolate because of my parents, but both of us have flu symptoms today and are waiting to go and have a test. But anyway, apparently the queues are very long and the doctors are very busy. So from that position, I just want to say thank you so much. I know that I've been very quiet, but it's been really useful. It's been really valuable for me. I think just from starting off in a situation where the whole situation was so bizarre, you couldn't sleep at night. It was very difficult to file what was happening. And through the Friday morning sessions, they've helped me to sort of work through different aspects of the whole situation. And I don't know if it's a good thing, but I mean, to a large extent, I feel as if this is life. Life is normalized. I've accepted it, which is scary in itself. But I think it's been very useful to have different inputs and hear where different people have been and how they've experienced it. And so thank you very much. It's been really useful. And every now and then I've thought, should I, you know, offer to give some input? But I think it's still sort of, I'm still trying to, there's still aspects that I'm trying to kind of, for me, the main issue in this whole thing was just the whole idea that you kept mentioning in the beginning, Andrea, that, you know, the whole situation just blew the limitations of how we perceive the world and you know, actually in a way, in a positive way, sort of opened up the idea of what is possible, but I'm not sure that we've retained that because it's become so normal. But anyway, thank you so much.
Yeah, yeah, thanks. No, I have that sense of actually, did we want to just rush back to normal, get our old lives back after that first wave? And then you're kind of thinking, hang on a moment, what happened to that imaginative, creative? Things are going to kind of all be different, and there's going to, you know, and then you think, oh, okay, Andrea, naive. You know, so yeah, but I'm hoping that a new normal might include at least some beneficial, positive ways of doing things. I'm right back to what Pedro was saying, that there are other ways of living, and yeah, whether we're in any sense intelligent enough as a species to go that way, well, that seems highly unlikely, but let's not get to, you know, sometimes change is imposed and then we get used to it and then actually, all right, it's a nice thing, we'll, you know, but yeah, future still sort of open. Luke, nice to see you too.
Thank you. Yeah, I suppose I can thank my COVID symptoms that I'm joining today because I'm not in class. But there's also, for me, there's this weird sense of normalcy amongst my peers and like being back at university. And I think this space has been very reassuring that there are other people dealing with the pandemic in the same way as I am, like mentally, and my family is like a contrast to this like illusion of normalcy that shouldn't exist right now. So I mean, I'm very grateful for that. I'm sorry to have missed the last few, but I'm glad to be here at the ending one. Yeah. Hopefully we're trying to get tests, but it seems to be quite a chaotic task at the moment, given the spike.
Yeah, yes, it's, well, you know, I'm very distressed to keep hearing this kind of sense of normalcy amongst students, population, you know, this kind of sense of you go to the beachfront and everybody's on the beachfront and nobody's sort of distancing or anything like that, given the fact that we have these horrible examples to kind of, you know, to learn from. But we are, in some sense, although we're extremely clever in some ways as a species, we're also extraordinarily stupid and motivated by desires. And there's something also that I find fascinating about this, is this mentality of, I want to say, exceptionalism. So yes, there are rules, and yes, one shouldn't be doing dinner with la la la, but you know what, I'm just going to do it this one time. Or, yeah, there are these rules, but, you know, I'm just going to make an exception for myself this one time or this other time. And everybody's making exceptions for themselves to these rules. So there's a kind of sense of, yes, 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 I know what the rules are, but just this just not for me this time. So I find that mentality very interesting. Yeah.
But I was also, I mean, just for me, university, it's been so weird in that sense where there is this sense of normalcy, but also my classes are small because we're a practical sort of class. But I think now there's maybe 30% of my class is now just not there because they're quarantining. And I mean, that's a huge number. It's a very distressing symptom of this sort of mindset, but yeah.
Yeah, unless they're quarantining out of precautionary and then not quarantining because they're sick. Yeah.
I don't know.
Just keep yourself safe, influence your friends, and try to.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, and if you do have this, you know, well, you know, let us know how you are. Okay, both of you and Sharon. Okay. Right, thanks. Who am I going to nail next? Does anyone want to not be nailed and named, or do you want to just, because I'd very much like to hear from everybody. Belinda's sending a chat. Does that mean you don't want to actually speak? Yes, Belinda, like Dave, is a bit too shy to actually speak. That's fine. Ethan, how about you? Ethan is another very regular participant. I'd love to hear from you.
Okay.
Hi, Ethan.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, thanks for it. I really enjoyed this, and I enjoyed, like Ashila was saying, that we got the outside of it and the sort of inside of it. Regarding lockdown, I watched two interviews recently, and the one was about a book that came out, I think this month, that 4 doctors wrote about the effects of lockdown. And well, I think they're all doctors, some of them might be scientists, but anyway, 4 guys. And they said one of the things was economists don't always measure these things in how many people have died, but how many years of life have been lost. So for example, a 20-year-old dying loses more life than a 70-year-old, more years of life. And one of the statistics they gave was in America, they are American, 800,000 years of life have been lost due to the virus over the last few months. But if you use that years of life lost with regard to the lockdown, 700,000 years of life have been lost per month. Because, you know, joblessness goes up, alcoholism, suicide, all that kind of thing. And then, yeah. So anyway, that was something interesting.
Yeah.
And I can give you guys the link sometime.
Yeah, pop. I'm terrible with P's. Put it on the chat, and that will enable us to.
I'll put it in one of our groups rather.
Okay.
Because it is not permanent, yeah.
One of the things that would be an interesting addition to that kind of modeling, I suppose, would be the realization now, again, I'm just talking from a Belgian point of view, being here, is that the people in the hospitals are in the 40 to 50 age range. It's a different age range of people being hospitalized in the second wave, as opposed to the first wave where it was very old people. So that will add to your age range, or what's it, age range statistical thing, but it also adds a sense of increasing, is it? Sorry, Asha, I mean, that's ageist, isn't it? To say that it's more worrying that, and I'm not saying it is more worrying, but it's worrying that the middle-aged population, that I'm in the middle of, maybe that's why I'm worried, is actually now predominantly it's that age range that's in the hospitals. Okay, but
and,
yeah, thanks.
I forgot to say about the second video I watched, which was also an interview by a South African guy, but who's been living in America and working there for a while. He fights against child sex trafficking, and he says now that, you know, the whole world's on lockdown or whatever, it makes it nearly impossible to get, you know, to find these people and find the children and stuff. So, I mean, that's also an interesting way to look at, you know, the pros and cons of lockdown.
Yeah.
And it's a much bigger problem than, you know, most of us know about it. But I think he said New York City is the capital for where a lot of these people are, these children and stuff.
So in other words, the lockdown regulations kind of shackle the authorities, but don't shackle the more criminal elements who are used to negotiating undercover anyway. So that goes on unabated.
Yeah, I'm not sure why they are harder to find during lockdown. Maybe it's because of the authorities. Maybe it's because people are just inside. So then those people stay inside because they don't want to be out. I don't know. But yeah. And his story is, I mean, quite compelling also, like how he got into that. Like I said, he's from South Africa, and I think it was in 1994. His sister was 12, and then she became a, you know, sex trafficked for like 6 years or something. And now she's okay and everything. She works with him against this child trafficking stuff, like all over the world, but mostly in America. Anyway, I'll give the links to both of those ones.
Okay, do. Thanks, Ethan. And thanks for your continued contributions throughout the seminar. You've been a very regular face. It's been very nice to see you. Yeah. Okay, we've got a couple more minutes, I think. Tabang, how about you? Love to see your face. There you are.
Oh, hi. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you for, you know, the synthesis you have kind of carefully weaved through the series of the seminar nicely for us, and thanks to Hashila for the observation of how the journey, you know, the trajectory of the seminar series unfolded from the inward to, I mean, from the outer to the inward. And that's a very, you know, nice observation. I think I managed only to join the seminar series in the second half, which is the more inward turn. And for me, it has highlighted quite a number of things. The inter-vulnerabilities that we suffer together, you know, whether consciously or unconsciously. And I like Martin Luther King's observation on this, when he nicely, you know, paints the picture that we are connected in an inescapable web of mutuality. And the intervulnerability, as he calls it, is that we all need a salvation, and it is entire vulnerability of salvation that we need. And the awareness of this mutuality of suffering impels us also to search for ways to heal the whole, rather than, you know, encasing ourselves in a bubble or denial. So yeah, so it just, you know, highlighted, you know, these, because I just, you know, happened to go through these writings on grief, and it is also through the seminar series that actually intrigued me, you know, to delve deeper into this.
Oh, good. Yay.
And yeah, another observation, you know, I'm actively involved in the men's sector against gender-based violence. And recently there is a move or a motion to open up the initiation season during December period. So whilst we are experiencing this second wave, there are also moves, on the other hand, to kind of open up, you know, spaces that have been completely locked down, such as the sector in the male initiation, the traditional male initiation. So yeah, it's interesting also to note this, because one would expect that we would rather err on the side of caution than, you know, to move drastically to open up more spaces, which will render us even more vulnerable. Yeah, so we're busy now discussing ways in which we can influence government to completely shut down the initiation season completely.
Which has a whole lot of social and cultural and psychological ramifications. But yes, yeah, well, I don't know. It's like, you know, being innovative about these things or die. That seems to be our options. You know? No, that's putting it a little bit too strongly. Yeah.
Yeah, well, one would understand, because there are other monetary motivations, because some people depend on these cultural practices.
Yes. Yeah.
So now they feel the brunt, you know, as more we kind of regulate, come up with more stringent measures to close down on what seemingly is their means of survival.
Yes, yes, that's the thing. Everything is always so complexly intertwined. But thanks for that. I see we're kind of running out of time. I just want to hear quickly from Gwyneth. You are the last name on my kind of screen, and would you like to just maybe say hi? Hi.
Hi, everyone. You caught me off guard.
Oh, good. That's always fun.
I just feel like I missed out on so much. As you were going back through, just reflecting on all the different seminars that were happening. But I have to say I couldn't keep up with everything, because I'm a student success coach at the university. So I have been working with students as well. I can definitely agree with some of the other speakers like Luke, just from a student perspective, how apparently students are treating the current situation. There's sort of like a very relaxed sort of vibe happening in residences on the beach and that sort of thing. And then just on all the different speakers, what they're mentioning, and specifically now that you've said we should possibly go back into lockdown again. could I possibly then hear from other people, because I have to attend a wedding next weekend. And I feel, I have to say, my anxiety is slowly but surely rising, because a lot of people are seeming to be quite relaxed about, we on level 1, not wearing masks, and just that sense of control that I don't know how many people will be there. All I know is that people will be coming from various provinces. So not just one area, it's various provinces. And you're there for quite a number of hours and potentially being exposed to a large group of people. I think for me, I don't feel, I think, very prepared for that. So any advice would be welcome.
Stay at home.
On top of should we go into lockdown or not?
Yeah, you know, it's tricksy, hey, because I mean, there is all sorts of social necessities. We're social creatures. We need to connect with people. But if one stringently stays at home for the next, I mean, we've got to get, I think South Africa we need to get our numbers down even further before we can think about opening up. I think we're opening up too soon. And I think that we are going to precipitate our second wave. And it will be these kinds of occasions, these weddings, etc., that contribute dramatically to that. It's all the social contact that we have that is the source of the major infections. So not so much the workplace, because there's measures in place, and not so much kind of hospitals, not even so much transport systems, like airplanes you would think would be like the worst, but in fact there's a whole lot of quite stringent measures that are in place in those kinds of circumstances. But our social life is totally unregulated, and that's where the infections will happen. So if it's outdoors, if you're wearing a mask, if you keep away from people, how do you do that at a wedding? But I mean, that's what you have to do. Yeah.
Thanks for the advice anyway.
Yeah, if you want advice from me, just stay at home, everyone. But you know, yeah, I've been in quarantine for 2 weeks, obviously having moved across, and one does it. But I'm in quarantine with my partner, which is quite nice, having been in South Africa for 10 months without that person at all. So yeah, it's easy for me to say. But if you want to learn from the horrible mistakes of Belgium, that would be, South Africa particularly Eastern Cape, because I mean, that's where we are really particularly bad at the moment, I think. Yeah. Okay, so all right, I think we are running on. I think I need to kind of maybe end the session. Maybe we should do our sort of traditional end. You can see in the PowerPoint, I did put on a few, or quite a few of the waivers that I could capture. So it's been very nice chatting to all of you, and yes, very nice to see the faces that I did see, and yeah, thank you. And also one of the things we haven't really thought about too much, but we'll think about it now, is the way forward. Do we want more seminars? What are we going to do next year? But Hashila and I will chat a bit about that too. And if you have ideas about that, email us. We're very open to continue thinking about maybe not necessarily the pandemic, but continue this kind of collective thinking together. I very much like it. Hashila.
Okay, so thank you to everybody that's sort of been through this journey with us, and yeah, I think it's just so powerful that we can't actually grasp it all now, but we're going to email all of you the link. Andrea did put it up on the slide earlier, where you will find each and every one of the videos. But as soon as this video is uploaded, so just give me until Monday or Tuesday next week to have that all up and running, we will share it with you. So it's all captured there, and you guys are free to look at it at any time. So just huge thank you to all of you for being participants. We wouldn't have a series if you were not participating. And then of course to all our awesome presenters throughout the series who gave it the richness that it has. So just a huge thank you from my side for all of that.
Yes, me too. Final thanks. And again, yes, if you are eager to delve deeper into any one of the issues, the presentations, the recordings are all there. They are extensively there in audio. Some of them, I have to admit, mea culpa, rather clunky kind of video kind of, you know, I learned as I went along. So some of them are a little odd. If there are some blank patches, the audio is there, but the video is, you know, I recorded a black screen sometimes. But yeah, so don't get concerned about that. And yes, but I hope that I will, or the seminar will have inspired some of you to explore certain issues much further and much deeper. For me, it was very enriching to go back and listen to each one of the videos and just try to pick out what it was that struck me most. I had a very intensive but interesting journey, and I would very much like to repeat this. But yes, for that, I think, thank you, Harshila, for being a partner in crime and kind of occasionally rolling your eyes at my technological incompetence, but I think I've improved as time goes by. Okay, great. Thanks so much and goodbye, and hopefully see you all soon at some point. Cheers. Bye. Bye, Glenn. Bye, Tavang. Bye, Gwyneth. Bye, Luke. Bye, Gary. Great. See you all. Okay. Cheers.
Bye-bye.